Wow. Okay. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of How I Met Your Mortgage. I'm getting all kinds of weird audio stuff in our system here, so
Oh,
typical internet type of stuff. But Jen, I think I heard our intro like 6 times, so I definitely haven't committed to the
it
memory
happens.
now. Yeah. All right. So we are
Okay.
back with
Maybe it's the
another.
medicine. I only heard it once.
You only heard it
Right. Maybe it's
once.
just
All
in
right.
Adam's head. Yeah.
It's that is
What'd you have in
terrible.
your coffee this morning? Whiskey? A
No,
traditional loan officer, old school,
Kahlua.
ready for the 08?
Yeah.
Oh, there you
All
go.
right. No, yeah, it's too early in the day at 6:30 for whiskey. Oh
You're
wait.
not a processor
Oh
after.
wait. Yeah, right. I'm not a mortgage processor. I'm a mortgage originator, so I can go a little easier than that. And I don't live in Texas, so it doesn't have to be whiskey. Right, so we've kind of already had an intro here, but our guest obviously needs no introduction. Those of you that circumnavigate the mortgage space, and even those of you in the real estate space, our typical audience probably know of or have heard of the infamous Chris Griffith. Welcome back to the show, Chris.
Still
Hi, Chris.
infamous. Like, I
Yeah.
haven't been infamous in a while. Like, have you seen me being infamous and stuff?
Okay, I'm gonna say recently, no, your infamy
Recently,
has been toned down.
Years?
I would agree. But I haven't seen her talk to you in a while. Jen and I saw you in Atlanta. We were at a conference.
January.
January?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it's been a minute for sure. And I think I actually even saw you in a sport coat that day.
Hey, I wear my hypocrisy has limits. Like, I wear a suit here and there. I don't wear a tie. I usually wear a V-neck T-shirt underneath it and some tennis shoes because dress shoes are pretty uncomfortable to be in all day.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, I clean up.
Well, I don't know. I guess it's a debatable degree of clean up. So we'll just roll with that. But Chris, tell us, what have you been up to all year since we haven't seen you since
Well, for
January?
one, for all the people that listen to this, that are like, "Oh my God," that are like a minute or two in, and like Christopher Griffith, like not this guy again. For the record, I haven't been infamous in a couple of years, and the only reason I was infamous was because when I came on the scene in the mortgage space, I've been in the mortgage space, but when I came on the scene kind of amongst a larger viewership, it was because I was really frustrated with the performance of many different large corporations and individuals with the way they were behaving around certain loan types and what that would do to ultimately the consumer and the industry and us as originators at the same time, right?
Still happening, but go on.
I was frustrated, and it's still happening, and I'm still frustrated with certain things. But the difference is, at the time, I didn't have means to impact change. And I think this is a basic human need. We all need hope in something. And so the difference then and now is we have an organization of 150 plus professionals that spans not only the individual loan officer and real estate agent, but underwriting into lenders and other partners and entities, so that we're able to make a difference, I would say, in the problems that we're seeing. And so having an outlet to change the problems you're seeing will prevent you from becoming infamous, I would generally say, if you don't have
There's a good
full
formula there.
wraparound.
And it's probably helping with the frustration level as well.
Well, right. When you're really frustrated with something and you can't change it, right, or you feel like you can't change it, and you feel like all the people that can and should aren't listening, what do? Well, you shut up, you complain, or you complain and you do stuff. I didn't do the first one.
Okay. No, you did not. And we had you on the show a couple of years ago when it was more infamy than change.
A lot.
And did you see this comment from Joe Feinhandler, Jen, that says finally a decent guest, I'm assuming, on your show? Didn't we just have Joe on the show?
We did just have Joe on the show.
I just want to make sure.
Joe, my man. Thanks, dude.
Joe. Attaboy, Joe. So tell us what that looks like, Chris. I mean, we're talking about vetted VA here.
Yeah, we're talking about vetted VA.
This is that outlet for change that you're describing. For those of you that don't know what that is, go look it up. It has probably been one of the greatest catalysts for change in mortgage and real estate for veterans and active military that the industries have ever seen. And that's not me stroking Chris's dick there, his beard. That's funny. I would, though. That beard has become epic. We talked about that before we went live, that it took you less than a year to grow that back. But give us some insight. Tell us about the kinds of things that Vetted VA is really charging forward with.
Yeah, would love to. So we are underway in a lot of different areas. To say, I hope we get into some of the other stuff too. I don't know what I guess this is just mortgage stuff, but so we'll stay on top. VEDVA, what it's been really about here lately is developing a profile of content that furthers our ability to educate, not only from a macro personal capability and accountability standpoint, but from a by the numbers kind of standpoint, if you will, or very rudimentary basic tactical level learnings in ways to deploy and then measure impact of those courseware or coursework with different individuals and entities. So not only are we making that impact with the real estate agent and the originator, but we're also making that impact with lenders now and even partnerships with some associations. Our newest partnership with the Association of Independent Mortgage Experts, AIM, I'm sure y'all are familiar. It's a broker association. There's always, here's what I'll say. There are lightning rods everywhere I found out in this industry. And the best thing to do is put on a brave face and run through and do the things that you got to do regardless. But I think that AIM is exceptional at a few things, or many things really. Advocating for the broker, probably one, but they're doing advocacy work with us to impact how veteran escrows are collected and if they're collected or required to be in states where otherwise they wouldn't be due a disability associated with their service. So creating a lot of different impact change like that, creating specific education coursework for our internal people, for other partners, and then now even getting down to the nitty gritty with veterans and kind of professionals at large. So we put out our white paper, which was kind of a 10-step approach to encountering some of the biggest myth. You always have different arguments and complaints like, oh, the pictures are Adobe Photoshop military. They don't look very military. It's like, okay, next time you get Griffith and Silkies and a beard, you're welcome. It's like, hey, there's other myths. You're not covering these myths. It's like, okay, next time you get more slides and more pages, and you're welcome, right? Like,
and Chris and his Silkies, got it.
Yeah, right. You can't please everybody, but the goal was to take and using critical analytics of data, which is what we warehouse from all of our membership, right, internal to VEDVA, and comparing and analyzing it against other sources of data like HMDA data or Ginnie Mae data, census data, all sorts of different consumer data and professional data that's out there. We can begin to see trends and we can begin to analyze the different impacts that certain people or education levels have to the experience of the average veteran. So it's been a busy 3 years now. I guess we've been underway. We've got a lot of growth kind of going on. I guess that gives a pretty good wave top. Oh, one more. We're getting ready to have summer camp.
Summer camp time again.
So we are second iteration of our cultural event, which is where we bring this year will probably be 150 to 300. We're capping at 300. Because of supplies, but we'll probably bring, I would guess, around 175, maybe 200 professionals out to North Texas for 3 days of fun-filled events, from shooting guns to airboats to regular boats to lakes to fishing to noodling, all kinds of stuff. So it's a good event to come out and see what our culture is about. We're going to have some veterans attending this year and some people not necessarily associated with the training. Last year's event was closed only to membership. This year we're opening it up to those that really want to understand what we're about. We have a tight community and our desires to grow, but not at the risk of outpacing our culture.
Always an issue in every echelon, in every organization, in every business. I see culture destroyed faster by rapid growth than probably any other single factor. Well, maybe greed, but there's another one that spins back to, historic. And we talked about this before we went live, that there were obviously a lot of bad players and individuals and companies and so on and so forth. And the almighty dollar drives a lot of what goes on here. So
people are skeptical of profit or over profit. Like the actions of a few definitely determine the posture of many, right?
Yes,
so
of course.
In general, when you don't understand something, like especially the profit in a certain industry or anything else, everyone's always out to think that someone's out to screw them or everything else. Most of the time when I find people or companies screwing people or doing bad things, it's not because they're bad people or they're setting out to screw people or they're a bad company. They don't know, they aren't aware, they don't have access to. Like these types of things become true when you have dialogues with them. But generally, I would say people aren't bad and people are out to hose people. And profit isn't a bad thing. It's definitely a good thing. Capitalism ultimately is the thing that drives us all forward. It's why we lead economically.
Absolutely. Yeah. Don't think for a minute that you're going to come across anybody in our industry that's going to knock capitalism.
Right. Everyone's like, China. It's like, listen, China's awesome. Like, there's a lot of awesome things to be intriguing about China if you take a step back and look at it in an unbiased way. But ultimately, unless you unlock the power of individuals, of hopes, of dreams, of investment, of small business, like, how do you build an engine to compete with it? And so I think that capitalism, profit shouldn't be something people are afraid of all the time. Look to create value that substantiates it.
That's interesting. Okay. That's probably one of the things that separates true capitalism from other political economic systems throughout history. I'm not sure that we're doing it quite right, but then again, I'm not sure that
it's hard to do right. That's for the record. That's worth pointing out. It's hard to do capitalism right. It's hard to continually bring value, innovate, show up, problem solve, handle the surprises, deal with the people. It's hard to build businesses, right? And that's why it takes individual liberty and people that have a really strong hope and dream and desire to pursue something, because otherwise they'd quit if it didn't matter to them, if they were just getting paid hourly to do it. Like, you wouldn't do that. Would you create this podcast again for $25 an hour?
As an employee, would I do the work working for Chris?
Yeah, like, you know how to do it all.
Yeah, you might convince Jen though, and she's even lived in Texas. Well, I guess we both have, but yeah, she's certainly lived in a more northern part of Texas. So, Chris, I don't want to, beat the 400-pound gorilla, as it were, but obviously when we're able to get somebody who's kind of got an overview of what's going on in the finance space, in the mortgage space, in the origination space, in the consumer end game space, with how crazy fucked up the market is moving right now, I've got to ask you, I've got to see what your insight is. I've got to see what your take is. We talked a little bit about this before we went live, and it seems like there's a lot of unjust panic. And again, like money, fear is a condition that exists in human nature. We're not going to run from it. We're not going to hide from it. It's going to exist. It's a motivator. It's a driving factor. It's one of those things that humans have had since the dawn of humanity. So, I mean, we're not being chased by saber-toothed cats here, but you smell what I'm cooking. So we talked a little bit about the fact that it really hasn't changed a whole lot in your space other than change. You still want to see people buy real estate. You still want to buy real estate. You still want to see people invest wisely. You still want to see those markets move, and not just from a capitalist standpoint, but from a this is what's best for the consumer standpoint.
I think it's very hard to show anything different than this, that in 5-10 years from now, over the next 10 years, the cheapest time to have bought a house would have been yesterday.
Today, yep.
Or Friday before rates jumped. But relax, seriously, because that stuff's going to come back down too. All things.
Yeah, that part doesn't bother me. And for those of you that are kind of watching what goes on in the mortgage-backed securities market, or with what goes on in mortgage rates, and please understand that right now, the mortgage-backed securities market is really the sole dictating factor. Now, there were times, the majority of them up until recent years, where we could look at the stock market, we could look at the yield, we could look at the bond, and kind of have a solid correlation as to what mortgage rates are going to do. But pretty much since the start of the pandemic, there's been a pretty significant disconnect between all of the financial markets, right? Normally, we would have seen, or historically, I should say, we would have seen where if the stock market was down, institutional investors are backing off, putting money into securities, granted lower yield, but lower risk. And obviously volume is a big driving factor in financial markets and investment markets. So securities would be up, including mortgage-backed securities. And when mortgage-backed securities are up, rates are down. Today is the complete opposite. Stock market, I got CNBC on the TV here behind me, is obviously getting crushed. The Dow's down nearly 2%. We don't want to talk about Bitcoin. I'm not going to get into the cryptos. Getting crushed. Investment markets are getting crushed. All of them. and mortgage rates are going up. So we've got a lot of disconnect there. But I do think, and Chris would probably agree, that a lot of what goes on in the mortgage-backed securities market, what pertains to mortgage rates, is preemptive. We're a little smarter than what goes on with, say, the federal government that way. And now there's rumors, we're talking about the Fed hiking 0.75 of a point. That's a big jump, the biggest we've seen in a long time. And I do think that 12 out of the last 15 increases with the Fed have immediately resulted in mortgage rates coming back down. So that'll probably be an immediate thing. Today isn't really going to be a significant long-term impact. And I do think that the impending recession, I keep using that word like we're not already in it, that the recession will also drive mortgage rates back down. I'm thinking early next year. But I would love to have your take on it, Chris.
I appreciate that. I think that was a long question. So I'm going to do my best to kind of walk.
All right. Would you please give us a thorough analysis of every available investment market on the planet in 30 seconds?
In 30 seconds. Here's what I would say. I think that every homeowner out there and every professional out there needs to get very serious about having a conversation about a few different things. And those things are, one, monthly debt, consumer debt specifically, the debt that you're holding that you may not need to be, or that you're holding that you don't have to be. Consider how you might rid yourself of those things if it's not benefiting you tremendously in a way that overall increases the thing that you should focus on is step number 2, bettering your household cash flow. Whether it's reducing your expenses, reducing the fun things that you do, or doing other things as a side hustle, whatever, to create additional revenue. That's something you should focus on. So 3, you can increase your liquid reserves. Liquid reserves, not cash necessarily in the bank, because I don't think that that's been a very smart thing over the last 6 months, right? It hasn't. Anyway, whatever.
And here's the weird one. Here it's zero smart because it earns 0. Be glad you're not in European countries where military invasions might result in the complete cessation of banking operations, and now you're actually losing money.
Right. But building up your liquid reserves so that you have staying power in the event or when the event of a downturn, whether it's personal, national, regional, local, whatever, prepare yourself. Why? Because sorry, I haven't done this in a while. Prior proper planning prevents piss poor performance. So,
well said, eventually.
But seriously, your liquidity matters. So a lot of people have liquidity in different places. Some of them have it in mattress money, right? Money in their saves, money in the bank, money in mutual money market funds, CDs, stocks, bonds, right? Some of those things are a little more liquid than others. I use assets that allow liquidity and compound at the same time. Doesn't matter. Make sure that you're doing those things, right? Because it is likely, like you said, that we're going through another economic cycle. We've been in a growth cycle for a while now. It remains to be seen if we're in an economic down cycle or a recession. And I think that word, a lot of people want to are we in a recession yet? Oh my God. It's like, if you don't shut up, I'm going to pull this car over and we're going to turn around and go home. Like, knock it off. It's like, at what point is it like that same dynamic? Truthfully, I'm not trying to be rude or crass here, but
no, that's not rude or crass. That's a great analogy.
Here's the thing. The market's adjusted and the things are true long before you recognize or validate the word being true. So does it really matter right now if we are or aren't? Look at the things around you. Look at the things that are going on. Make your best estimate. Even if we are in a period of recession here personally, we're still buying. We're still buying real estate. We're still refinancing real estate. We're still investing into new assets. If you're worried about the market, you probably might be in a place where you could experience some issues that are going on. If you're losing population, if you're losing jobs, if you're losing corporate headquarters in mass, and it's creating negative overall impact to you economically and locally, that might be an indicator that you're due for a stalling or a small adjustment. But I still think that national housing supply isn't in a position, even when considering rentals and new properties coming online, isn't in a place where you're looking at major catastrophe. If anything, the major catastrophe I think that's more likely people should be worried about is what inflation may continue to do to drive prices in housing if they don't get certain things under control. But there's a book out there for those looking here. You can see it. This is a book I would recommend and have recommended to a lot of people. I'm taking my entire company through it right now. If you're listening and you want to follow along, you can join Be My Neighbor group on Facebook. Small group right now, just starting it up with our company, but I'm taking them through and helping them understand this one book. This book is a book I read for the first time a little over a decade ago now. It's impacted how I invest and look at different markets. It's called Emerging Real Estate Markets by a gentleman named David Lindahl. David Lindahl is someone who invests in commercial property, multifamily, a lot of different things like that, but has great insight and understanding into what causes markets to change, right? So great book to check out to understand what's going to go on maybe near you, understand some of the immediate drivers, because real estate is not a national thing.
No.
Will everyone stop like pretending that it's the same temperature everywhere? It's the same price. It's the same problem. It's not. It's all
Well,
local.
God, there was even a time, if I remember, it's been a while, where different states or regions in the mortgage space were different. I remember some of these big wholesale lenders would actually publish a different rate sheet for Colorado than Texas.
Yeah, absolutely. State adjustments. It was a very common thing. I mean, I haven't looked at rate sheets enough here lately.
I don't think we do it anymore.
Right. Do you even get rate sheets? I will say I don't even get rate sheets in my email anymore. Maybe just be a good filter. I don't know.
That could
You're
be.
not wrong. State adjustments are definitely a thing. I'm not certain if they still are. It wouldn't surprise me terribly if they are, because ultimately it's a lender's assessment of risk. That said, a lot of the state adjustments that you used to see those lenders making, what markets are the popular markets right now there, y'all? Most of the time it was the rural markets where they provided an adjustment because of the state that we're going into. It's just a safer market. Now that's where a lot of the people are growing. It's a lot of where the new growth is occurring. It's where new corporate investments occurring, right? Because corporations still want to grow. Jobs are still out there, right? There's still opportunity. The problem is cost and affordability everywhere. So if an employer can't give the average person a massive raise to compete with the local cost of economy that they're in, what do? Well, why don't we go to a cheaper place? And then those people won't be need to pay. We can pay them 75% of this amount here, and they're still going to be 125% better over there. Right. So I think you have a lot of corporate movement. I think you have a lot of job movement, people movement. And I think that's going to reshape a lot of things and hopefully keep things like state adjustments out of the way.
But this happens in every major economic cycle, which is exactly how you described it, which is true. Recession is, I agree, a term that is going to be unique to specific markets, specific products, those kinds of things. Are we seeing a recession in the lumber industry? Are we? Obviously, what you're ready to turn the car around over is the real estate stuff, because the entire free world wants to know when the bubble's going to burst.
Man, it's like y'all did math.
Yeah.
Remember what that's called?
We go up and down. Yeah.
That's a sine wave because I went up first.
Okay.
Sine wave, I believe. The direction.
I didn't do all that well in calculus. I'm not going to lie.
That's how movement occurs generally, whether it's up, down, like cycles happen and everything. There's opportunities regardless of where you're at in those cycles. Typically, you can find opportunity depending on what your need, plan, goal is in those things. I think long term, to bet against real estate as an asset, I don't know. You'd have to explain to me kind of how you justify it, because I think it has more intrinsic value, more intrinsic demand, and ultimately it's a cost associable with shelter, a human requirement, regardless of what's going on anywhere. So if the U.S. collapses completely, China overtakes everything, it's like, where do I want to be? I wanted a bunch of houses and maybe some apartments, maybe a beef and cattle and land thing, because people still need those things. They still need a place to live. They need to eat, right? I think it's focused on fundamental pieces of need. And so, I don't know. I'm encouraging people to buy still, depending on certain pieces. I think that some borrowers should be wary, and some markets should be wary, at least in the type of assets or investments that they're making. That said, it'd be kind of case by case. I don't want to make things too general on that downside. I think too many people do. Like there's this thing that Moody's put out. They highlighted, it was pretty ambiguous about how they determine most overvalued markets. And what seemed to me, from what I've known is going on, regardless of what's driving growth, markets that have grown rapidly for 12 months by certain percentages were flagged as likely to depreciate up to 25% due over valuation, right? One of them was listed was Sherman, Texas, here in my backyard, right? So when I see it, it's like, okay, well, critical review here. Big publication like thinks that I'm wrong, and I say I'm wrong only because the opinion that I've personally arrived at after considering all of the things really close to me with a microscope is it's not the case. And I think more than likely we're in for, like everyone else, kind of a national pause while everyone emotionally reacts to what they don't know is going to happen just yet, right? And then the markets that were positioned well continue to push back and grow. I don't think there's a drop in value. I think, if anything, there's stagnation for a period or a decrease to the pace of growth, even if there's not stagnation. I think you have to show supply issues. I think you have to show job issues, population issues, and a lot of other things if you're going to show things like that article intends, right? An overvaluation poised for a major drop in value. I think I appreciate the article because I get to come out and very easily say, I think they're wrong. And I'd like to be on the record saying I think they're wrong. And I'll let you know
You are now.
later because I'll be on here saying stuff later. But we'll see. Who knows, right? Like anything could happen globally. We really are, to a degree, in a global economic environment.
Yep.
I've heard people, really knowledgeable people here recently say, inflation's through the roof. They're destroying the value of a dollar. Well, the value of a dollar isn't necessarily just associable to inflation. And inflation itself, if anything, is only associable to a change in prices, not necessarily the strength of a dollar, right? Because that is in judgment to a lot of different things global economics like considered, right? So I think inflation is challenging in a lot of things. I think far too many times people think inflation's only when the government prints a ton of money. There isn't. Supply side, demand side, there can be all different types of inflation, things that cause prices to go up, things that can be healthy in that matter. Not to say we're in a healthy inflationary environment, or not to say that prices are going up necessarily because of demand or supply alone, but all three things working together. It's like, I am crap didn't planet. Did you notice that?
We got it.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. I wonder how the closed captioning will go with that, but yeah,
hopefully,
we got
Right.
it. Hopefully it'll pick that up.
Right.
And the inflation's an interesting one because, again, we've got such a short memory. It's just amazing to me. We were falsely suppressing inflation for a decade, maybe more. If we were getting our normal 2 to 3% per year, the shit would cost more today than it does after a 10% inflationary year anyway.
It's like almost a decade stall out. And so I talk about something I call a 5-year VA house hustle, which is my approach to buying a single family house, assessing market, location, acquisition, rehab, and then resell or cash out valuation period, right? 5-step approach is how I go about it. But I talk about something during that process, during market or location specifically, about buying back in time. And when you can go into a market that's growing, that fundamentally is changing because of new drivers with employee ability, right, with jobs, with population, with infrastructure, all of those things, and you can buy a house cheaper than what it sold for in 1995, you're buying back in time. Like not all markets, you can assess it that way, but in a growing market on the heels of what we came through from 2008, where everything just stalled out after it dropped, right, for a long period of time, was going to be like slingshot engaged, right? Like Ricky Bobby, here you come, baby. Like that's what it felt like for me. It's like, oh my God, this property's not going to sell in less than it did in 1995 ever again. Like nothing, you know what I mean? Cost isn't even like associable to then, right? So I think when you can find certain markets, again, they need to be growing. They can't just be like declining markets, or that's obviously not going to work. But not very many markets decline over decades of time that never correct. And markets that do have big declines ultimately, eventually correct. Look at like Detroit, right? Like there's a bustling little market that I bet people weren't betting on a decade ago.
That's true. Baltimore went through that cycle. Yep, same kind of thing.
Best time to invest in real estate is when everyone thinks you're an idiot for investing into real estate.
So, yeah, that certainly brings up an interesting piece. And yes, Jen, I know we're going to run over, but we always do with Chris, so let it slide. The cost of real estate, the supply and demand issue that's driving it's gone up. The cost of real estate's gone up a lot in recent years. I'm still big on acquisition. The cost to borrow the money has gone up this year a lot, no question, but it hasn't been perfunctory. There's just no way I'm getting. Well, okay, yes. Last year I purchased a property, I don't know, 3% interest rate, and it's gained 50% in value. And I wish I were making that up, but there is actually a property that I have that does fit that formula. Am I really going to give a shit that it's now going to cost me 6% to borrow the money if my annual return is 50? I'll take my 44 net instead of my 46 net or my 48 net or whatever everybody is upset about because interest rates are no longer 2, they're 5, or they're not 3, they're 6, whatever the case may be. But I think you said it before we went on. Or maybe we've actually been live when you said it. The real estate isn't going to get any cheaper than this.
Yeah, I don't think that it will. I think this. Here's what I like. Everyone, they have arguments that are incoherent, like my speech sometimes. Apologies. And what I mean to say is,
That's the whiskey. We get it.
Yeah, lumber and all of these things and prices are all going to go through the roof, and they're going to stay through the roof. And then there's going to be a big housing collapse. Everyone's going to sell their houses with lots and lots of equity to move to where?
I'd love an answer to that. Anybody who knows the answer to that, please let us know.
I have on the house that we bought for $740 4 years ago, that's now worth probably $1.5 million, is a 2.5% rate. Like, my payment on the mortgage is cheaper than it would be renting something a quarter of the house's size and like half the quality, right? So what I mean to say is, if the prices are high, there's no building going on, the market's down. Like, if people have staying power, or even if they don't, for the record, what happens during major economic events now with housing? Dun, 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 the government's here to help, forbearance for all, whatever they do, right? They've shown their hand, and the reason why is because destabilizing or them not doing something to deliberately stabilize the housing market against foreclosure. Ultimately, they learned in 2008, foreclosure, if it hurt anybody the most long-term, or the banks, a lot of the times, the banks didn't do well taking back and managing and holding all of those assets.
No, they didn't.
Property didn't do well being sitting and doing nothing either. Many of the banks had a big loss because of theft and other things too. So all I mean to say is, I don't understand how you're arguing that real estate value is going to come down when you're talking about inflation and the value of money inherently dropping rapidly faster than ever before. If anything, that tells me that I'm very happy to have my 2.5 rate, 30-year fixed loan against the value of an asset that's likely to be inflated just as fast or better than anything else, right? Only this one can cash flow too, and I can change my circumstance. So I don't know. I think that they're largely just people that are pessimistic. They see negative stuff everywhere. I think that I don't know. They make
and part of the problem is there's a lot of juxtaposed commentary out there. There's a lot of conflicting information, and again, I think part of it is that it is hyper local. What's going on in your backyard is different than what's going on in my backyard.
Another great point. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of situation that we're dealing with, especially in real estate value. It always has been a local, regional, state-based kind of a thing, more than it has just been a national kind of a piece too. Even though we have national cycles, I think that arguably the last 10 years have been really more of a national cycle of growth, catching up from the previous issues that we had compared to anything else. And then you saturate it with demographic and, like, I don't know. I think it's going to be an amazing decade for homeowners. I think it's going to be a great period to be bold in. I think that it remains to be seen. I'm going to quote Logan Motoshami here. It remains to be seen just how many houses and how much sex and how many babies the millennials are going to have. My bet's they're going to come through, and they're going to really deliver on the baby category once they settle into housing, which they're all doing now still. Right. So I don't think that short-term, mid-term, long-term, I'm investing in real estate and I'm not slowing down at all.
Yeah, I think that that's wise, pretty much regardless of the market, the space, the locale. I think that the supply and demand issue is something we probably don't solve for a long time. When somebody asks me about when real estate values are going to come back down, I'll usually say something like, in 2050, they're going to come back down to whatever they were in 2045.
We're seeing a change now, for what it's worth, and higher rates absolutely impact consumer confidence in home buying. And so when you look at new home applications taken and you look at the number and the decline and everything else, economic sentiment, all of what the consumer's weighing before they do this massive thing, right? The biggest thing they're doing this decade, probably, right? All of that weighs on them. And so I think ultimately that even when there's not a problem, you have kind of a stall and impact, a kind of decision point. We're seeing that right now. But to that being said, it's not like inventory now has rebounded and we're at like great numbers. We're still very, like Logan again, a savagely unhealthy housing market. It's a very unhealthy housing market because demand is driving inflation harder than anything.
Sure.
Right?
Same problem here. Yes. I think what we've defined in what's basically the Denver metropolitan area is that a balanced market, a 6-month inventory would be about 30,000 listings. We might have 15% of that now, maybe even 20 if we have some local real estate agents watching chime in. But the supply and demand issue, there's just so many factors that have culminated where we're at now. Builders not building. We don't do multi-generational living. We haven't for, the entire existence of America the way they do in Europe, Asia, Latin America, etc. That's certainly a problem. Now, and I got corrected on this last week. Now, the biggest generation, the millennials, are buying homes. Look at Jen nodding. Yeah, power to the people. No, you're only 1 million stronger than the boomers, and it's just because a lot of the boomers are aging out of this thing we call life. So
that's such a nice way to put it. Aging out of life.
Aging out of life. Well, there are days where eternal rest has a nice ring to it. Don't get me wrong. But yeah, so we've got, and the boomers, they're a great example. Huge population, all living longer, all staying in their homes longer. I mean, there are just so many things that have been coming for either decades or even centuries, and certainly in years, that are compounding the supply and demand issue that, yeah, I cannot imagine there's ever going to be a time where any piece of real estate somebody would buy today would ever be worth less than what they're going to buy it for today. Ever. Yeah. I cannot imagine that that's possible. We're going to have ebbs and flows. We're going to have highs and lows.
Every house that's here now and every house that was built 30 years ago that's here now, right? That those houses are here 20 years from now. Houses get demolished all of the time, right? Houses fall apart. Houses have to be completely fixed, refixed, reinvested into. The market, people are always going to buy homes, even if interest rates are crazy. Interest rates are crazy right now, nowhere nearly as crazy as they've been. And long term, ultimately, is if we do move into an economic downturn, right, into a kind of a down cycle of an economic event, what's going to happen with Fed policy? What can they do? What can't they do? What impact does it create on themselves and the nation if they keep things in certain situations? So I think ultimately there's not a lot of cause for freak out at all here. I think everybody should get back to work. There's a lot to be done. There's a lot to fix. And I think that most of what's going to happen to follow is the economy is everybody's literal emotional choices behind spending their money. What's more emotional, spending your money? Not a lot.
Little. Right? Very little.
People spend their money emotionally. People think emotionally before they think logically. I can prove it. I have this thing I used to do to prove it. You want me to prove it?
Oh, yeah.
Last night, as Aaron slept quietly in the bed, I creeped into the bedroom and opened the door quietly. And I sneaked in, slowly slid her panties to the side so I could fit my socks in the drawer without waking her. I was putting up laundry, you see. But people react emotionally before they react logically, is what I mean to say. And when it comes to spending your money,
we're about to take this podcast to a whole new level.
Right? Going to be rated X soon. I think
we're there, but
look, you can't help it, right? People react emotionally before they react logically. Know that about yourself and know that about other people too, and give them a little grace because of it, right? And understand that with money, an emotional thing, when it gets spent, that people are going to react emotionally. So they're doing that right now. And I think that's going to cause as much of an impact as anything else if the R word comes out here. But I think that there's no reason to. Wait for the end of the story. Wait till you hear the punchline. Think about it for half a second and then react, or else you might find yourself laughing when there wasn't really a joke.
True story. Yeah. And of course, we do live in a world where a lot of what goes on in political America, corporate America, has to be driven on fear.
Well, how many of us feel judged? Like we're judged on if we or how we reacted, or if we didn't react and how we didn't react, right? Like you don't have to relax. Think about it, breathe, make a good choice for what you want to do long term, right? And try not to make hugely emotional decisions, even though you know emotions impact your logic and thought process.
Very true and very difficult to do. But yes, wise words this time around from Chris Griffith. Slow down, take a breath, look at it with a little clearer vision. It's hard to do. I know human nature is a unique condition. But yeah, Jen, I know we're way over. Go ahead. Take us. So unless there's anything else you want to hear about with Chris and his wife and her panty drawer.
Oh boy.
All right. Guess not.
I mean, we got
don't
some
share
good
the same
reactions,
drawers.
some
It was just a
comments.
story, folks.
Yeah.
Relax.
Yeah, we did get some reaction to it, but yes, thank you. And I do think it's important for people to slow down, take a breath, take a step back, look at the bigger picture. But yeah, we are emotional beings.
That works better when you type it out and people have to read it, because I'm telling you, it gets you better. Like, that's how I experienced that statement for the first time, like 8 years ago when I saw it. And I thought, oh man, that's epic. Totally had me. Totally had me. Didn't see that. It's like the Did You Know guy.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mhm.
On TikTok, you know what I'm talking about? Justin Nunley, right? It's like, oh, okay. Anyway, sorry, I'll shut up now.
All right, ditto. Go ahead, Jen. It's all you.
All right, guys. Well, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the show. Thanks, Christopher, for being on. I'm sure we'll have you probably the week after Jason Frazier in 2023, which is like, I think I'm booking like September 18th or something of next year. It's crazy. So big thank you to everybody who has supported our show for the last 5 years. I just want to throw that out there. But if you want to find out more about us, you can text tips to 63566. It will ping you back all kinds of stuff. You can get a copy of Adam's book, Just the Tips. You can book a free hour of coaching with us, past episodes of the show. But big thing right now is you can get your tickets for Social Media Day Denver, which we're just over like 2.5 weeks out. June. I'm thinking Mile High Mastermind already. June 30th is Social Media Day Denver. Thank you to Metro State University for helping us out with that event. So again, you can get tickets by texting tips to 63566. We've got speakers on everything from Facebook ads. Adam's going to talk about video. I'm going to talk about Meta's scheduling software, kind of everything, some mindset speakers. So definitely don't miss out on that. And then right after that, tickets will go on sale for September for Mile High Mastermind, which is September 16th and 17th. Thank you to University of Denver on that one. We have a great time partnering with the schools for the different events. So yeah, find all that and more by texting tips to 63566.
All right. Well, thank you, Jen. And Chris, thank you. Always a pleasure to have you on. And hopefully we'll get to see you sooner rather than later, and hopefully sooner than the fall of 23.
Hey, listen, tomorrow's my birthday, so if we can do this the day before my birthday again next year as a birthday present to myself, I would like to say that I'm sorry for how busy we're likely going to be in a refinance period, which would be my best guess. I'd like to say to my future self also, way to go getting it right on not freaking out, because the markets that you were following did in fact blow up and you made some sound decisions, right?
Oh, I love it. Perfect. I am going to go back and watch this. I'm going to remember your birthday next year, and I'm going to pull this up and see how right Chris was, and it won't be the first time. Thanks again, Chris. Thanks to all of you watching or listening live or in syndication. You can catch the next episode of How I Met Your Mortgage at 10:30 Mondays, Mountain Time. And yeah, I guess that's it. You guys all have a great week.
Bye, guys.